Some last-minute choreography here. So our topic for this discussion will be innovation challenges and expansion. And you will have questions, so please make sure that you do log on to Pigeonhole and put those questions in, particularly those on the outside. That will be your only opportunity, of course, to interact. So I am delighted to introduce Chirfi. Please come on up. Chirfi Guindo, and this is our tight choreography, crossing over. Good to see you.
Good to see you, John.
Please take a seat. So I'm delighted to have with us Chirfi Guindo. He's the Executive Vice President, Head of Global Product Strategy and Commercialization. It's a long title.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, at Biogen. There must be a shortened version of that. And he has served on the executive committee since November 2017. Chirfi came from Merck, where most recently he was president and managing director of Merck Canada. And before we move on, I actually wanted to just start by asking you, what else do we need to know about your story to inform us about where you are in startup ecosystems?
So thank you, John. And this is such an honor to be here in this distinguished institution. You know, I was trained earlier on as a French engineer. I went to École Centrale, which is, I guess, we like to refer to ourselves as the MIT of France, right? And so that shows how much respect we have for MIT, for this institution.
I think I just came back from the MIT of Finland.
Okay, there you go. There you go. But I didn't stay in engineering that long. I realized very quickly that I was not going to be an entrepreneur or an inventor. So I switched to business. And so it's been almost 30 years now that I've been in business, much of that with Merck, in the last 4 years with Biogen.
Very good. So I recall from looking at your LinkedIn that your first job might have been like financial.
Yes. So I started as a financial analyst in New Jersey in the headquarters of Merck. But again, I realized quickly that I didn't want to stay in finance. So there's a theme there, right? You know, I was doing audits and financial analyses and, you know, supporting corporate finance efforts. It was really great training. But again, my boss at the time said to me, you know what? You ought to be more in the business. You ought to be more kind of interacting with customers, interacting with, you know, the external stakeholders to create value for the company. So I've been at it since.
So managers, here's a lesson in identifying talent early on. So, so you've worked with Merck. You were all over the world. I think that's part of our initial intrigue when we had our conversation a couple of weeks ago. You were in, I've written it down because it's too complicated, right? You were in the US a couple of times. You were in Paris. You were in the Netherlands. You were in South Africa. You were in the Netherlands again. The US again, and then Montreal before coming here. Did I get all of, did I miss a country?
You got it right. You know, a few countries along the way, but I didn't actually live in those.
You didn't live in them.
The ones you mentioned
Okay, good.
Where I worked and lived, yeah.
So you've driven collaborations and businesses all over the world, fair to say. So I just want you to tell me, and you know, it's maybe a little self-serving, why Biogen and why Kendall Square?
Yeah. Well, so, you know, I was kind of I like to refer to myself as a global nomad. You know, so you know, I get bored after a while, so I always try to you know, to learn new things, to discover new countries and regions, new business models and things. So I was always driven by this need to, you know, go to uncharted territories. So I was very much an emerging market-minded kind of guy. My first big job at Merck was actually managing director for the African region. So you just imagine this huge continent where we did not have direct presence outside of South Africa and in the northern part of the continent. And so my mission was to go and find partners because we wanted to make sure that our medicines reached people all over the world, no matter where they were. And so this is one of the things that sort of spiked my interest early on in this whole access, this mission about access. It's good to discover medicines and but if you don't get those medicines to people who need them, then what's the point? And so that's sort of it became a drive for me along the way. And so even now, everywhere I go, Canada most recently, you might think Canada is a developed country, and everybody has access to medicine, single-payer system. There's a lot of talk about it. But even in Canada, you see that there are huge disparities. You go to some of these reserves where First Nations communities live, they don't have access to vaccines. They don't have access to diabetes medicines and other things. So when I was at Merck, then we actually initiated some exciting projects with entrepreneurs to try to reach those communities on reserve. Exciting stuff.
Very good. So I'm guessing, back to the Africa part, I'm guessing that would have been around the period when companies like Merck were trying to get their protease inhibitors into the continent. Is that correct? So what were some of the challenges there? And were there any run-ins with entrepreneurs in that area?
Oh, very much, very much. You know, I was on the front line, you know, carried my bag and went from ministry to ministry and trying to find people who were willing to talk to us because...
Oh, it wasn't a bag filled with HIV protease inhibitors? No, okay.
But, you know, those of you who remember, those are the days where there was a lot of denial, right? And so, you know, many of those countries did not want to even admit they had a problem with HIV. When senior officers were dying, bank managers were dying, you know, a lot of the professionals were the first to actually be impacted by HIV on the continent. And so there was this need, in most cases, to sort of hide what was going on. And so luckily, we found a country that was very open, that was willing to engage. That was Botswana.
Botswana,
really? Of all places. This was a rich, relatively rich country, fairly well developed from an African perspective. And the life expectancy had gone up to about 68, 70 years because they had really good development over many years. And then in very, very short time, in less than 5 years, it went down to 65 years old, life expectancy, because of HIV. And so that country opened up. We formed a really, really good partnership. We trained local stakeholders, local entrepreneurs to do social marketing. All of that was endorsed by the government. And Merck provided the antiretrovirals, as well as the expertise in terms of management of the project. For those of you who are interested, it's called the HAP, African Comprehensive HIV and AIDS Program. It is referred to often as the first truly impactful public-private partnership in HIV, which actually led to the PEPFAR program subsequently, the US government program that really bent the curve of HIV in the developing world.
So it sounds like it was a real challenge to knock on those doors initially, and even to get it to move forward. You're engaging with entrepreneurs in the area to convince people that this was acceptable to treat this disease, to acknowledge this disease, and
that's right,
and so on. So there's still plenty of that going on now. You're from Mali, is that right?
I was born in Mali, that's correct. You can hear the French probably.
I'm not sure what I'm hearing, honestly. So
confused. I'm confused.
So that's right. You know, when you are so global, you move around. I bet when you go back to Mali, you speak more like...
Absolutely.
Yes, of course.
I speak 2 local languages,
yeah,
but we communicate in French because there's so many different languages. It's just easier to stick to French.
Okay. that makes sense. So I was going to ask, Mali is not alone in this, but you know, 20 years ago maybe, we would look at the denial of disease, the denial that you have it, the reluctance to treat it as being of another world, like nations in Africa. And in the last couple of years, we've noticed that we also have that problem of denial of certain things, denial that we have it, denial that it exists, denial that it's significant. That must have brought back a lot of experiences for you when you saw that happening right here in your own neighborhood.
Yeah. Oh, certainly, and sadness.
Yeah.
Because it means that you know, we're not learning as a community, as a society. And we've been there before with HIV. It was 25 years ago. And we're still talking about, you know, do vaccines work, right? I mean, that kind of stuff is pretty sad. Now, the misinformation has just basically amplified the challenge. You know, we didn't have Facebook back then in the early days of HIV, but you know, we had to face the church in many cases. You know, we had to fight misinformation at a smaller scale compared to what we are dealing with now, of course. Leaders who did not want to promote safe sex, as an example. Right. Think about it. They thought that safe sex, condom use, was something that was invented by some Western conspiracy theorists, or there was some hidden motive to control population growth in poor countries, for example. Things like that. But now it's a whole other scale with Facebook and all the misinformation that's going on. But it is saddening.
Facebook, which is right near Biogen, by the way. It's right down the road, on the same street.
Yeah, I shouldn't stigmatize Facebook, but it's social media in general.
Okay, so back to Ontario then, which is where you were taking us. You were involved with Mars. Maybe you could say a little bit about what Mars is. It's a startup ecosystem that is recognized widely. Maybe you could say a few things about your engagement there.
It's not unlike what we have here at Kendall Square. I can't remember which one was first. Maybe you could remind me whether the Canadians copied you or whether... I don't know.
There's plenty of copying to go around, I'm sure.
But what I can say is that the Mars innovation ecosystem was really a brilliant idea from the Premier of Ontario at the time, many years ago. He really saw that the way to grow the economy and the way to promote innovation in Ontario was to focus on the proximity between U of T, which is obviously the MIT of Canada.
Exactly.
You could say that, probably. The proximity of U of T and the industries and companies that were in that area. And so he actually funded or co-funded a building. This is a facility. It's a huge facility next to U of T in Toronto, where he wanted he wanted to give space to bright scientists, engineers, inventors, where they could just come and have fun, play around, and discover things, and come and meet with funders, come and meet with potential partners. And that was the startup, the concept of Mars, and he has been extremely successful. Last time I checked, there were 1,400 initiatives coming out of the Mars innovation ecosystem, startup companies that have emerged from that. And when I was at Merck, we actually benefited from that tremendously. We used to organize competitions where we would bring our scientists from our labs or our people who were involved in access, which was something I was very passionate about, to try to get these startup companies to find solutions that we hadn't thought about. You see, and we were humble enough to realize that 98% of the knowledge in whatever field we're in did not exist within our company. And so a lot of good ideas came out of that. We found innovative ways to bring medicine to the reserves that I mentioned earlier, in the First Nations reserves. And those are done by young people who are engineers from, who were actually experimenting. So my takeaway is that it really is important to have this sort of facility. So this is why I'm excited about the Kendall Square concept. This is where you have the highest concentration of knowledge. Ideas are generated from here. In fact, Biogen, I was just reflecting on that. Biogen itself was initiated by a former, actually still professor at MIT, Phil Sharp.
Yeah.
He was one of the co-founders of Biogen, and they were experimenting. Phil Sharp and his colleagues had ideas, and they set up this company 40-some years ago, which has now become one of the leading biotech companies in the world.
Yeah, I think when I finished graduate school, they were one of the only pharmaceutical companies that were hiring people in Cambridge.
There you go.
Which is a pretty extraordinary thing if you think about it, and of all of the pharmaceutical companies that are now in Cambridge, both startups, mid-size, and global companies that choose to pick up their headquarters elsewhere and put them here. It's pretty remarkable. So I guess, I don't know if this has been on your watch, but there have been a couple of examples of Biogen employees going out, starting a company, getting support from Biogen, and being brought back in. Is there an example there that where a group of entrepreneurs did something that they couldn't have actually done inside a large company?
So at Biogen we have more than 90% of our portfolio actually has something to do with collaboration partnerships. So if you look at our current drugs on the market or the ones in the pipeline, over 90% come from partnerships, and we're very open, in fact, to investing and partnering, along the ways that you've mentioned. So we're specialized in neuroscience, and we believe that neuroscience is really at an inflection point, kind of like oncology was a few years ago with the advent of the anti-PD-1s and immunotherapies and so forth. Neuroscience is really at that stage now, but there's still a lot that we need to learn about the brain, about brain health. Biomarkers are not yet well established, right? Blood biomarkers, CSF biomarkers, imaging biomarkers. These are all areas where we need smart people to come up with ideas, people that we are interested in partnering with. We are focused on Alzheimer's. We've been in the news lately, sure, as you've noticed. But it's not just Alzheimer's. It's Parkinson's disease. It's ALS, stroke. These are all diseases for which there is really no solution, or very few solutions for patients. And I think the opportunities for partnering are huge in this field. Not to forget, digital health. And we happen to believe that if there's one area of medicine where digital health could be particularly relevant, it is brain. So the convergence of
Our very first outside question is actually on digital health. What is the split of IT specialists to scientists at Biogen now, and will be in the future driving digital health?
This is excellent. I could tell you, our CEO, Michel Vounatsos, started an initiative about 3 years ago or so, and we had very few people who were really specialized in digital health in the company. Today we have more than 200 people.
There you go.
Right? 200 people who are focused on digital health, and they come from all sectors. Right? We have engineers, data scientists, neuroscientists, all of them working together to try to really leverage the new capabilities that we have in AI and machine learning, and trying to accelerate, right, the selection of patients, trying to accelerate our ability to develop drug, more personalized, more targeted therapies, but also trying to find biomarkers that are relevant. So there's a huge opportunity here. So we've done it.
Yeah. Sorry.
200.
200 in digital health. Any of those in digital therapies, like?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh yeah. So it's digital health broadly defined. So digital therapies are part of it, but also the biomarkers and the monitoring of patients. In fact, we've done a few deals in the space. Later this week, you'll be hearing about an exciting digital therapy deal that
terrific.
we just signed. So I can't comment on it now.
Oh, sure. You sure I can't just pull it out of you? We're all amongst friends here, right? Okay.
But one I could call out, just out of interest, is one called Therapanacea. You may be familiar with that company. Yeah. It's a French company, French startup, which was initiated by a math professor who happened to be a professor at my school.
Aha, the MIT of France?
The MIT of France.
Okay.
Yes, you got it. So he started this, and brilliant mathematician and physicist. And so we, you could Google it, you could look it up. We're really excited about the prospects of using machine learning and AI to accelerate drug discovery, to accelerate, our personalized medicine goals, but also to monitor patients, and generate relevant data that will continue to inform us and so we can continuously improve the patient experience and patient outcomes.
Terrific. I noticed that Dan, one of our audience members, actually wants to get the conversation back to the topic, which is lovely. There's so many interesting things to talk about, but as a corporation, how do you structure a collaboration/business relationship with a small startup, and how do you structure a win-win?
Yeah, so we have a whole team that is dedicated to this. And you know, as I said, our areas of interest are very clear. You could look them up on our website. But broadly defined, it is about neuroscience. It is about using you know, biomarkers in whichever way you define them. So if you have an idea, if you have a vision, get in touch with us. My advice would be to be very intentional and very targeted in your approach as a startup, as an entrepreneur. If you're into neuroscience, I like to think that Biogen would be a good partner. You know, we are the leaders in the space. If you're into infectious diseases, you may want to think about Merck or Pfizer or Gilead or other companies and so on. So do your homework and you know, as entrepreneurs, I know you. This is how you operate. You're very focused. You never give up, because sometimes we may not respond as quickly as you would like us to. But if you're persistent, if you have a bright idea, you know, usually you will find partners. You know, because we are desperate for good ideas. There's so much we don't know still about neuroscience.
Maybe you can comment on how commercialization, where it becomes to be critical, maybe, where it becomes critical for entrepreneurship, the commercialization aspect, the commercialization considerations, and how you actually go global.
Yeah. No, thank you. No, this is really critical because, you know, as you start out, you may have this broad vision, and you obviously have the vision, but, you know, this is to discover a drug, to develop a drug rather, and to commercialize it it's a huge, huge undertaking. I'm stating the obvious here, but I'll just give you an example, perhaps. There was this drug discovered by Ionis. You know, at the time, Ionis was a relatively small startup, and they discovered this oligonucleotide. You know, in theory, this drug was going to be a good option, had the potential to be a good option for SMA, spinal muscular atrophy. This is a rare neurological disease that affects roughly 1 newborn out of 10,000, right? And so they wanted to partner it, and luckily, Biogen became a partner. It was a really, really good transaction, no complications. And we took this drug, and we finalized the studies, we developed it, and got it approved, registered, first in the United States. And as of today, in less than 4 years, we've been able to make this drug available to more than 40 countries. Right?
That's incredible.
So that's what it takes. It takes really a lot of commercial capability. When I say commercial, it's commercialization, actually, I should say, because it is the marketing, it's the market access, the regulatory, it's the medical affairs, it's the patient support, all these components that we call commercialization, and you need to do it at scale. Mm. And so for you to bring your idea to patients in all these countries, I think a partner like Biogen will be critical.
We have a question with 7 votes. 7 votes. We don't normally get to 7.
All right.
So let's bring it up. As a large corporation doing a lot of R&D internally, how do you balance what work should be done internally and outside?
I love this question too. I think at Biogen we have, you know, we are humble enough, as I said earlier, to realize that probably 97, 98% of the knowledge regarding the brain is outside of our labs, right? And so, so we actually need to do some of the work externally. We have, in gene therapy, for example, we have collaborations with some academic institutions, UPenn being one. We have
MIT of Pennsylvania?
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm sure they'll like that.
Yeah, I'm sure they would. Penn State would be angry, but...
Yeah. Anyway, so we do that. We do a lot of work collaboratively. Another example I would give is SAGE, right here in Cambridge. We entered into a collaboration with them on neuropsychiatry, and this is a really exciting program. If I may, just
please go ahead. Please go ahead.
And SAGE came up with this, you know, new class of therapy. By the way, depression is a huge public health problem, as we all know. It's become even more of an urgent need since COVID, and sadly, it's affecting younger and younger people. Right? You know, suicide rates are going up among young people. So there's a need to have new treatments, new treatment options in depression. So Sage came up with this new drug that promises to be a treatment on demand. It's a 2-week treatment, right? So when you have an episode of depression, you take it for 2 weeks, and then, you stop. Presumably, right? If the data is confirmed, if the drug is approved, it could really be a game changer in the treatment of depression. Instead of taking these pills that patients take day in and day out with all the baggage that comes with it, right? So weight gain, sexual dysfunction, and other liabilities of the current drugs. Now, this drug does not have those liabilities, and it would also be used when you have a spike in depression, in depressive episodes. We saw this as an opportunity. We did not have the capability in-house, right? Back to the question.
Yeah.
So we entered into a collaboration with Sage. Sage brings the R&D capability for depression. We bring the commercialization capability, right? And together, and the neuroscience capability, because there is obviously an interface between depression and neurological diseases. And so this is where we sort of find the synergy, we find the sweet spot by sharing the work, bringing the capabilities, and hopefully soon, if the drug is approved, we will be able to serve patients and bring them a new option that is desperately needed at the moment.
Very good. So let's go with the next one. What are some avenues you have had success working with startups? I guess some of the possibilities here thrown out are money, space, co-creation, equity stake, etc.
All right.
Do you have incubation?
Do we have?
Space? Incubation space at...
So we don't at Biogen. We don't. I know other companies have experimented with this, J&J being one, of course.
Yep.
But my Canadian days, we did use this opportunity in the Mars building, because at Mars you could rent space, and Merck did do that. But we haven't done that at Biogen.
Okay, so when engaging with startups, how easy is it to get internal buy-in, any sign of NIH syndrome not invented here?
We don't have this problem at Biogen, as I said earlier. Quite the opposite. We are very much in the mindset of external innovation.
I have to say, I'm hearing that more and more. Yeah. There was a time when not invented here drove so many decisions about even just getting buy-in, due diligence teams going out and finding all of these wonderful opportunities and just not being able to convince people that it was better than something that could have been invented in the... But that culture is completely...
So in biotech now, you won't see that as much. I don't think so.
So we have a couple minutes left. What about the access to this local ecosystem do you find valuable in technology and for accelerating learning?
Well, I think we are blessed here in the Kendall Square area. This is probably I think you said it in your opening comments, probably the highest concentration of knowledge, certainly in our field, in biotech. And so it's a blessing to be here, and we intend to take full advantage of the knowledge power, the proximity with MIT, other prestigious academic institutions, some of the world's best hospitals. That's really important in our business. So you could do clinical trials. You could go from idea to development to clinic in this relatively small area of Massachusetts. Is pretty impressive.
So here's the big challenge, that we've never done all of the questions, I don't think. We have one question. Don't ask another one. No more questions, no more questions. You have a you say you're going to have 1 minute, and I'm burning up some of that time. You have a very interesting career as you worked in the same organization for 25 years. Actually, I guess it's 2 major organizations. How did you stay broad with a wider outside view of the world and industry, even though you're in the same company or in two companies?
Yeah, I love this question too. I love all the questions. So I said earlier that I get bored after a few years, even though I worked for Merck for indeed 25 plus years. I never had the same job more than 4 years. I was always...
Now you have though, right?
Now I have.
Yeah, okay.
Now I have. Although my job changed a bit.
That's right.
It changed 2 years ago within Biogen. And so this is why I worked and lived in all these different countries, and I like to think about myself as kind of an internal disruptor in that sense, always pushing to do things differently and do new things, and and it's been good so far. So we have so much more to do.
We do consider ourselves to be a global community here, so you may not have to go anywhere else.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I'll take that. Thank you.